Today we're going to have a nice talk, more than a chat, on Blade Runner, the 82 sci-fi cult classic by Ridley Scott. And Alec, kick us off.
I love this film. I really do. I think it took me several watches and watching several different versions to really kind of get through it, process it, understand it, and really learn to love it. I remember the first time I ever watched it, I watched the director's cut. So it was pretty later in the game when I finally saw it. And I didn't really get it. Like, I didn't get some of the things that came through it. And I thought Harrison Ford did a great job. I thought it was shot really, really well. I loved the soundtrack. But I expect a lot from Ridley Scott, and I got it, but I was also like, why does everyone love it? And then so I was like, you know what? I'm going to watch the original theatrical edition, and watched it. And it kind of helped process the story a little bit, but then also helped me realize how great the director's cut, or the great cut, is compared to what the theatrical was. And I do know my uncle actually prefers the theatrical edition over the non-theatrical edition, because that's how he first saw it. That's how he kind of really processed it. But obviously, for the most part, what really is done with his work print and then with the final cut is so much better. And I think a much better story, better pacing. I don't think is the right word, because obviously there's a lot of drawn out moments, but it adds so much layers to the movie that just makes it great. So
yeah.
And Rutger Hauer has one of my favorite monologues in cinema history. Yes. Hands down.
Yeah. No, I do want to speak to the differing versions of this movie. I've only ever seen the director's cut and then now the final cut. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I saw this movie until sometime in high school. My dad bought it on DVD, and it was the director's cut. I've actually still got that copy. Now, he had seen the theatrical, and he actually went to the theater in 82, and he said he might have been the only guy in the theater. I'll have to confirm that with him. If it wasn't, it was just no more than a few people, because obviously the movie famously bombed spectacularly hard at the box office. But this movie's influenced so many directors, and production designers and video games, and everybody's trying to replicate the way this thing looks and feels, this whole cyberpunk, version of the future. And people get close, but they never quite are able to completely duplicate it. And it's a credit to what they put together. I did want to mention, I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Christopher Nolan, his favorite version would be the theatrical, for the same reason that you mentioned, which is that's the first one he saw. That's the first way he saw it. And I think there's something to that with this movie. Whatever is the first method you saw it, first iteration, is probably going to stick with you. So yeah, for me, as the director's cut, although I don't prefer that over the final cut, because the reality is the director's cut's pretty much the theatrical with the voiceover pulled out. And so shots just go too long. Like, things hold for a long time. And the pacing is a lot better for me in the final cut. So that's kind of the version I prefer.
And they added a couple more scenes that were in the international cut as well, like some of the more violence. And then they redid a scene as well.
Yeah, the scene where
Zhora,
where Zhora is killed.
Yeah,
they reshot.
Yeah, supposedly they were like, she looked just as good. Looked like the exact same that she did in 82 when they reshot it.
He was never happy with how she kind of fell through the plate glass, and so they redo that. It didn't matter how much time had passed; she was still really fit and showed up. They redo it, and it's seamless too. You can't tell that's new footage, which is weird to me. That never happens, that you shoot with that big of a time gap and cut the material in, and then it's just completely seamless.
It has something to say about the cinematographer of that little shoot. A lot to say with Ridley Scott. And I will say, touching base, like, I have a lot of problems with the special editions of Star Wars because they added so much. Like, I feel this really worked. The final cut really works as Ridley's true vision because, one, he obviously didn't get final cut on the 82 theatrical version. The director's cut really wasn't his version. It was just basically kind of a work print that they decided to release as a director's cut, even though it wasn't really his cut of it or his final cut of it. So I think I'm okay with him changing those things and then updating those things to bring it to a wider audience. But he didn't really add much in the way of new footage, just replacing that one scene. Other than that, it's the same movie. It's not like he added whole big scenes with a walking, Jabba the Hutt.
No, there's no CGI additions. I think there's some things cleaned up. Yeah, there's cleanup, but it's not, they didn't redo, model work and replace it with a computer rendition of that. It's still the model. And this is just peak. This is one of those movies that's peak like optical effects, what you could accomplish with models and just weird techniques that are largely forgotten or abandoned now, I think. But I feel like those techniques are what Christopher Nolan, kind of what draws him back to this movie, is what can be accomplished in camera.
And I got to say, like, a lot of those practical effects, they withstand the test of time a lot better than some of these CGI effects. Like, as computer graphics get better and better, you look back at some of these CGI and you're like, oh, that's terrible. That's so fake. Where at the time we're like, this looks really real. I mean, did that with video games all the time growing up. Like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Like when 007 GoldenEye came out for N64, we're all like, the realistic graphics. This is like almost real. And then now we look back and like, what the heck were we thinking? But you don't get that with the practical effects.
No, you usually don't, especially if they didn't push them beyond what they were kind of capable of, which in this movie, there isn't anything. Now, you can kind of tell that this film is dated in that it doesn't have more of the mid to late 80s style action sequences. It doesn't, that's kind of what it might, for the modern viewer, that's what it kind of lacks. Like there's not a lot of the bigger set pieces with more intricate fight choreography and like explosions and stuff. It always feels more intimate than that, but it's a pleasure to watch every time. And you're right, the Rutger Hauer's speech, which was part improvisational because he self-edited a bunch of it down when they went to when the camera started rolling, because the speech in the script is a lot longer, and he had the creative sense to just kind of self-edit and clearly had an understanding of the character. And then just a great directing moment for Ridley to just be cool with that. Just let him talk. Let him do his thing. And it's a transcendent performance. It really is. It's funny because after he dies and it cuts to that expression of Harrison Ford where he's just sort of dumbfounded, I have the same expression. Like, I'm just in awe. I'm just, wow. Yeah, it's certainly one of my favorite moments in all of cinema. And there are days, today's probably not one of them, but there are days I wake up and might think to myself, what's your favorite movie today, Ben? And there are days it could easily be Blade Runner. It really could. I do love the fact that it's 2019 and we're living off world. Everything is dark always and rainy always. And there's spires of fire coming out of Los Angeles. And, LA may be on fire, but we're definitely not living off world yet. So I love how was in the future. Technically it's a movie of the past at this point now. Yeah. But what's funny is like, within a week ago, and I think it's maybe getting bad again, but New York City looked the way LA 2019 did, with it all orange from the fires. But now you'll read, this was not a particularly pleasurable shooting experience for anybody. This is one of those movies that's like a labor of love. and maybe this would be more referred to as a labor of hate. I know Ford was just, this was a miserable shoot. A lot of it has to do with the aesthetic of it, with everything being wet and like they shoot in a lot of these old locations, and so stuff was smelling bad, and like it was not a fun environment for an actor to have to operate in. So I know he does not look back on this fondly at all. If an interviewer starts bringing up Blade Runner, his countenance changes immediately.
Though he went ahead and did the sequel. Like, this is a great little segue. Like, I mean, I love Harrison Ford. I think he does fantastic in it, even though if he didn't want to be there. But this guy came back in his 70s and has revisited 3 of his most iconic roles. You know, Indiana Jones, you know, Deckard, and then obviously Han Solo as well. You know, came back, even though 2 of them he really didn't care too much about. Like, Indy is his first love, but he wanted to be dead as Han Solo in the original trilogy, let alone, you know, come back for the sequel trilogy. And obviously didn't really like doing Blade Runner, but still came back for Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, and that looked like a much more enjoyable shoot. And I don't know how many weeks or months he had to shoot for that, but yeah, that looked like a better deal. And I guess we could easily turn this into like a double episode on Blade Runner in 2049, but the reality is that 2049 is as a good a sequel that's ever been made, that it deserves its own discussion by us. And so we will table that. And we will get to that movie at a later date. The easy thing with this movie is to kind of fall into the trap of only discussing the way it looks and kind of sounds and the production design and costumes. But the reality is there's a really powerful kind of debate here in this movie of what it means to be a human being. And that's, I'm convinced that those of us that appreciate it for that is why we love it. And then everybody that doesn't really get that or enjoy that exploration, it just is this, oh, it's cool looking, but it's slow and it's boring. Yeah.
No, it's definitely about that. What makes a human, what makes created intelligence actually become its own intelligence, its own self-awareness. I mean, talks a little bit about how technology turns into slave, labor for us as well. I mean, you can kind of, it's touched on briefly, but that's some of the things. They had these replicants do those hard jobs that they didn't want humans to do, but yet gave them the ability to feel, have emotions, those kind of things as well. So it's, because one character wanted to basically play God.
There's a lot of parallels in this movie for me with something like Jurassic Park, like the first Jurassic Park, with a creator that just thought about, not why they should do it, but what's called the Goldblum line of,
because they were so worried about whether they could do it, they didn't stop to think, should they do it? And that was badly quoted.
That applies in Blade Runner as well, because you've got this entire, and effectively it's a profit machine. Like, and I don't know if that's talked about enough, but it's like, well, why was this? It wasn't just that like these jobs were like too dangerous for regular human beings. It's like it's a cheap labor force. Right. And so it's kind of got that going for it. And then, the larger discussion of like, what makes us human? Are we more than just our memories? It's a pretty deep film. The problem is the pacing for a lot of audiences now is like feels slow. For me, it doesn't, but I'm in love with this film, and I loved it the first time I saw it. Like I don't remember what that initial viewing was, but I came away like, wow, this is going to stay up in my top 10 probably forever. And I just wanted to see it again. And then when he did the final cut, it was even more better. Like I just even had a better appreciation for it because it was even paced better. Like I didn't have to sit through those flying cars, like flying through the pyramid and stuff, that those scenes still exist, but like they were twice as long.
Shortened. Yeah. But we also have to make a nod that one of our fabulous friends who we've talked about in a previous episode, Mr. James Hong, makes an appearance in this movie as well. And plays a fantastic little character. Like, just love it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, as Chew. I
only
make eyes. I make your eyes.
He's wearing that suit.
You Nexus 6, right? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The music, Vangelis, the score is something else. It still feels, in some ways it feels dated, but then in others I kind of waffle, because in other ways it still feels like the future. It's almost a shame that Ridley had to put a date in the opening crawl. Or the opening, it's not really a crawl, the opening text.
Or it's just like Los Angeles 2019, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost a shame that it's gotta have that date in it. Like, the studios should just put software in now that we stream this stuff where they just arbitrarily move that date. Like, because so 82, 2019, what's the math on that?
Yeah.
Almost 40 years.
Yeah, almost 40 years. Yeah, so what, 37?
Yeah, so this when I stream this, I just want to see that date arbitrarily moved up like 38, 40 years.
Except that then Blade Runner 2049.
Just rename it.
Well,
just
at some point, just keep renaming it every year. This year it's Blade Runner 2052.
Yeah, exactly. Now, this movie did get some Oscar noms, but it was just the VFX and then the art direction. So they at least was acknowledged when it was made that was high level work. But this is another one we've run into that just took decade after decade of it to reach this cult status. So a lot of stuff in the there's a ton of stuff in the 80s that's like this. I mean, hell, most of John Carpenter's catalog outside of Halloween had to experience this. You talking about James Hong, Big Trouble in Little China? It was
Indeed.
A bomb, and
it was a total bomb, and now it's got a cult following.
Yeah, and The Thing, it wasn't as adored as it is now. So some of these things take time. My question is, like, what outlet do we have now for these movies that maybe bombed in the box office to have repeat viewings, create cult status? Like, is that possible anymore?
I mean, the problem is you obviously get with streaming, if they get rid of so many movies so often because of wanting not to pay the rights and not worth having it, or the rights becomes too popular and then the rights become a lot more expensive, so they drop it. So
I think
you just got to buy it. I mean, or we need to somehow bring video rental.
By the way,
back.
the studio's not in the red with Blade Runner anymore. Hasn't been for a long. No. I mean, right around the time that my dad would have bought the DVD, the DVD sales for the movie were starting to pick up with the director's cut, and then final cut, and then Blu-ray of the final cut, and then 4K remaster of the final cut. Like, no, the studio's whole with Blade Runner.
That's good. That's good.
By the way, when I went through the Warner Brothers tour several years ago, they had the airship that's got the advertisement on it for going off world. Mm-hmm. And that thing is tiny. Yeah. It's not that big. Like, the model work in this movie is exquisite. And a lot of these models were not that large, but the level of detail is just mind blowing. And I was like the only one that walked by it that of 50 people that even acknowledged what it was. Just like, oh my God.
And they probably just grabbed a bunch of model kits from the local hobby store and
just
took what they needed and just put them all together.
That's all the best stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's how they did all Star Wars stuff, was that.
But I love, you bought me that book years ago, like a coffee table book of the artwork of Blade Runner. And it goes into nice detail on how certain effects were achieved. It's fascinating. You're talking about a visual aesthetic that 75% of it maybe, or 60% or something can be accomplished by one guy with a computer. And so it's like, why would you do that now? Why would you spend the time to build something that
probably
labor intensive?
Costs more now
it would cost way more now. Yeah. But the results speak for
I'm going to
themselves.
have to read that book when I get there. When next time I'm there, I'm going to read that book.
Oh, it's great.
Go through that.
It's great. Yeah. It is. It's basically a Blade Runner art production design coffee table style book. And it's full color for the images that were color, full color prints of a lot of the model work. And it's mind blowing stuff. This movie is absolutely a work of art, and every frame is, and just creative decisions like red, reflecting red in the eyes. Just it's so well thought out. I don't know where I rank Ridley Scott as far as directors, but it's pretty dang high.
Oh, he's probably in my top 10.
Somebody was asking where he
5.
would rank, and I all time I would think top 10 to 15 maybe. He doesn't quite have the number of like great films as like a Spielberg. Like he's like 2 or 3 short from like Spielberg's got like 6 or 7 movies at least that are just like all time greats, and I think Ridley's got more like 4 maybe 4 or 5. But he's up there. I mean, and he's still doing it.
He's up there. Like, yeah, I mean, he's still killing it. Like, I mean, one of my favorite newer movies is The Martian that he came out with a few years ago. And I think that movie's absolutely brilliant and done really well.
That feels less like a Ridley movie though. Like,
it does. I mean,
I can't explain why. It just feels like less of his fingerprints on it.
But that doesn't mean it's not good.
No, it's good. Yeah, Ridley Scott is one of the best to ever do it, and probably getting into a debate with somebody on whether this is his best film. It's certainly my favorite Ridley Scott movie is Blade Runner. I actually do put it above Gladiator. As amazing as Gladiator is, it's kind of a hard decision to make, but I do have an appreciation more for what Blade Runner is, and philosophically what it kind of, the questions it brings up. It's a deeper movie for me than Gladiator. But as far as rewatchability, I don't know.
Well, and I also I love Black Hawk Down. I think having read the book, he did such a great job of taking what happened from the book and, you know, obviously changing a couple things, but that movie's also fantastic. And
and then Alien's just
of course,
legendary. Yeah.
It's just,
so yeah, he's as good as there is, and unbelievable that he's still working.
Producing,
still working.
So making stuff.
I'm just curious, like, can he regain something close to some of these earlier works?
The quality level.
But it's tough to do. These movies don't just show up every now and then.
And sometimes it gets harder when you get more fame and you get, your budgets become bigger. You don't have to make those hard choices, which actually make the movie better, where you have to cut things or you can't do it the way that you want to. So you have to come up with a more creative solution. And that creative solution actually turns out to be better and actually work better and is is received better than what your original thought would have been.
Yeah. There were creative restrictions with Blade Runner as far as what could be. He did have the clout of Alien behind him when he went to make this, which helped. But this had to have been a tough experience for him to coming off that wild success of Alien to do something like this that was a creative risk and not to have it received well initially at all. Because I'd have to go back through his filmography to see like what was the quote unquote comeback movie. But this probably set him back several years. The fact that it failed so bad.
Yeah, and then he did Legend after that a couple years later. Oof. Thelma and Louise in 91.
So almost 10 years. So like, let's put that in perspective, right? Because Black Rain is Black Rain's fine. It's not a bad movie.
But it's not. Yeah, I'm saying something that's commercial success that's going to put his name on the map. I mean, really, I would say even with Thelma and Louise, I would even put it back either G.I. Jane or Gladiator is really what
Thelma and Louise though was very successful, and like both commercially and creatively, it was heralded. It was an Oscar, had a lot of Oscar buzz. But yeah, we're talking about almost a 10-year period here, 9 years between those two movies. And so, yeah, it failing at the box office, this is that era where could absolutely ruin your career. Like one movie could ruin your career. And so, and then I know Legend has its huge fans, but I mean, nobody's sitting here calling Legend an amazing movie. Like it's
no.
So yeah, things were kind of precarious there for a while for him as a director. But yeah, he's one of my favorite directors as well. And there might not be more than 4 or 5 films, but I mean, that's 4 or 5 of the, what I consider some of the greatest movies ever made. And Blade Runner is definitely my favorite of his stuff. Not by a lot. Gladiator is behind there. And like you said, Black Hawk Down is tremendous. The only reason Black Hawk Down doesn't get all the love is because it was only like 3 years removed from Saving Private Ryan. That's the only reason that movie doesn't, is because it just didn't come out earlier. Oh, well,
Blade Runner, it's done. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you can kind of get known when we put out a new video or a new short, anything like that. But Ben, it was great talking about Blade Runner.
I love this movie.
It's a great movie.
Yeah. Go watch Blade Runner again, everybody, or for the first time. If it's for the first time, what a treat. Or you'll hate it. You'll just be like, this is so slow. In that case, you can keep that to yourself.
Yes, we don't want to know.
All right, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.